Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm going to be taking a look at Agent Venom. There isn't really too much to say about the uniform, so I'm going to jump straight into the testing. The first thing that I'm going to be looking at is his PvE performance, but that will be kind of limited because most of the testing will be focused on PvP, considering that his kit leans more towards that and is better situated for it. The build that I'm running on him is a brilliant CTP of regen, so I don't have a damage proc on him. I also have a 6-star artifact, some HP Odins, but mostly the others are Uru, and I also have the team up collection at level 15, which means that I have an additional 5% pierce to symbiote characters that also applies to Agent Venom. The standard first test that I did was versus Null on stage 24 without using a leadership or supports, and I was able to finish this stage with around 2 minutes and 10 seconds remaining. That is an above average clear time, but I don't think it necessarily means that the character is very good for PvE. Although the character does do well in PvE, I don't think he is exceptional in it. It's mostly that he finishes the rotation with the 4th skill, which is an iframe ignore, and it allows him to bypass some of the animations or things that would normally slow down a clear time for most other characters. If you want to build the character specifically for PvE, you can utilize a CTP of Energy or a CTP of Destruction. You only really have to delay cancel the 5th skill, but with a bit of practice I think that you can make it work. However, if you don't really want to worry about missing the damage proc, you can go with a CTP of Rage, but keep in mind that a CTP of Rage usually provides you more value in things like ABX and ABL, and the character doesn't really have much value in those modes. With that level 80 increase, I was able to shave off around 1 minute and 20 seconds from the clear time. Because I cleared the content relatively quickly, I need to go to a higher stage or a more difficult boss in order to get a better perspective of how much of an improvement the tier 4 makes when compared to the level 80. So on stage 60, I'm able to complete this with around 50 seconds remaining, again without using a leadership or supports. I also did a stage 29 of Kang, this time using a leadership and support, and was able to clear the first phase in about 2 minutes. The rotation that I use for the character is to do a 5 delay cancel. You do that when he goes up in the air and you kind of see the camera about to shift or he's about to hit the ground, and then you do a 3 cancel, 4 cancel. The 4th is the one that you want to proc on, and the 1st and 2nd skill you can spam before this rotation just to fill up your tier 4 faster if you have the character at that level. If you have your awakening skill, you can quick cancel it at the start before going into your typical rotation of 5 delay cancel, 3 cancel 4. If you also have the character at tier 4, you want to make sure to save that tier 4 skill at the start of a new rotation so that the damage increase that it provides applies to the rest of the skills, as opposed to just using it whenever it's available, because that damage increase will start to dwindle down and you won't get the most use out of it. If you plan on using Agent Venom as a solo or hybrid character, then you will benefit from his tier 4. He does gain a pretty substantial 18,000 attack increase and around a 30,000 HP increase, at least for my account, which will obviously help improve his survivability and provide some additional support offensively in a 3 vs 3 kind of format. In terms of the strikers, you can use any of the good PvE ones, so that's Ghost Rider or Thor. Ghost Rider is a good option because he has matching instinct type, and for PvP you can use any of the good ones there, which would be ones with iframe ignore, but if you don't really feel like swapping them around, then just use another one that has a matching instinct type and also has a damage or attack increase in their striker skill. The one that I'm currently using is Captain America. As you can see from this clip, the tier 4 upgrade improved his clear time by roughly around 2 minutes. Versus King, I was able to reach that same 30 health bar mark around 40 seconds faster, and then was able to complete the fight entirely this time with around 30 seconds remaining. Just for reference, at level 80, with 35 seconds remaining, I still had around 16 health bars left, so you can see the improvement in terms of the damage it deals as well. Not only the time, it does about 16 health bars more in the same amount of time. Agent Venom doesn't really have much use in Alliance Battle Extreme. There are far better options for it, including even Venom now. The character doesn't have all of the cancel effects and doesn't really have a high number of hits as much as some of the characters that excel in this mode have. At level 70 and having to do some swap plays for the cancel, I was only able to hit a little bit over 9 million, which isn't really that great. It's okay, but even at tier 4, I wasn't really able to get much past 10 million, let alone 11 million or more, which would be a good indicator that the character can excel in this game mode. But again, he doesn't have a good number of hits across all of his skills for him to be strong in this game mode. The real value of Agent Venom will be in PvP game modes, specifically ones that are in a 3 vs 3 format, so that would be Otherworld Battle and Alliance Conquest. He won't really cut it in things like Timeline, just because he doesn't really have those very top meta effects that you need to excel in that game mode. So that would be things like the Immortality effect or Revive, or having very stacked stats and healing effects like Thanos does. Regardless, I did take the character into Timeline to showcase his kit and show you his potential value as a solo character and more so as a hybrid character. Agent Venom does have a lot of good things going for him. He has a 55% damage increase versus supervillains, which is definitely noticeable, but in these tests that I did, I'm not even utilizing it because I used Molecule Man's leadership, which means that any kind of increases or decreases to factions doesn't apply. Besides this, Agent Venom also has a good number of defensive abilities. He has a 5% passive heal. He also has an emergency heal of 50% when he gets under 30% health. He spams 5 seconds of invincible every time he uses the 4th skill, which is the iframe ignore, so he can constantly spam that. And he also has 40% chain hit damage reduction that applies to all symbiote characters, including himself. And if you're able to get his artifact at max rank, you also gain an additional 30% damage reduction to all symbiote characters again. His AI rotation is pretty solid as well. It usually opens with the 4th skill, which gives him that invincible, and then usually transitions to the 5th skill, which both of the skills having partial iframes also helps with his survivability. It's also worth noting that the 4th skill does move around quite a bit, which can be significant if the opponent character's skills end up going out of range, or if they have kind of a close range for their attacks, or if they have a specific kind of area of effect. Agent Venom can end up going outside of that area of effect or their range and end up avoiding some of the damage or potentially interrupting some skills and forcing the opponent to go into other skills. Offensively, Agent Venom has that 50% damage increase to supervillains that I mentioned before. He also has guaranteed crit, 33% penetration to all sources that he spams and almost always has up because it's activated from his 4th skill. He also gains, I believe, 20% chain hit damage from his uniform passive that applies to all symbiote characters. And again, if you have his artifact at max rank, you're also able to get an additional 20% increased damage to all characters if they are over 25% health. Additionally, from his skills, Agent Venom gains a 50% attack increase every time he uses his 4th skill, so it's basically always up, and he gains damage accumulation from his 5th skill, and considering that the AI follows the 4th skill with the 5th skill, you basically gain a lot of offensive increases the longer you can keep the character alive, especially when he goes into his awakening skill and gains even more on top of that. You can see that even though I'm using a less than ideal solo build for the character, where he doesn't have super guard break immunity and also doesn't have super guard break on his skills, and besides the fact that he doesn't have immortality or revive, the character even at level 80 is able to take out some of the top tier 4 metas, including in some rare instances Wolverine with his immortal artifact. If you plan on building Agent Venom as a solo or hybrid character, his performance will definitely be improved and noticeable when you get him to tier 4. The character will not only be tankier because of the increased base health, but will also consistently have better survivability because he's healing for a larger amount every second, including the emergency heal when he drops under 30% health. This improved health and healing can potentially allow him to better get to his tier 4 skill and survive up to it, which will even further improve his survivability by increasing his health by 60% at max rank, and also increasing his damage by 70%, giving him some burst damage for the next few seconds. These health and healing increases also help with his offensive capabilities. Like I mentioned before, the longer he survives, the more he is able to get that damage accumulation up from other skills, and the attack increases from his 4th skill. And if he can stay alive for long enough, he can activate that awakening skill, giving him even more offensive capabilities and potentially allow him to burst down or one-shot the opponent, especially if the tier 4 skill is also active. You can see from that last clip that at level 80, Agent Venom wasn't able to beat that team and ended up dying versus Sentry, but at tier 4 he was able to completely win the fight and not only survive versus Sentry's first life, but also take out his second life to win the entire fight. In terms of the build options for the character, you essentially have 3 choices. You can build him as a solo character, a hybrid character, or a support character. Though keep in mind that if you do end up building him as a support character with something like an Insight or CTP of Liberation, then you don't really care if he's tier 4 or not, since you're mostly relying on the support capabilities and passes that he provides, and not so much him surviving and dealing damage. If you decide to build him as a solo character, I would probably think that a CTP of Conquest would be the most ideal option for him, since he has Invincible that he constantly spams from the 4th skill. You have that covered. You also have the healing, which benefits from the recovery rate that the CTP of Conquest provides, and he has that chain hit damage reduction and the damage reduction from the artifact, meaning that you have the kind of defensive aspects of the build covered from his kit. So the CTP of Conquest not only helps that, but will also improve his offensive capabilities, and in some instances will be able to burst down opponents quickly and avoid being able or having to survive for a long time. The other option that you can go with is a CTP of Authority. This one typically will work better if you can also get another support in there to increase the damage reduction even higher, because he only has 30% damage reduction that he can get from the artifact. It doesn't have his own damage reduction. Then he can't really reach that max 100% kind of pseudo immortality effect, and you're mostly just relying on the healing layer stacked up with the Invincible and the kind of higher damage reduction from the Steel effect and other sources. It's also worth noting that the Conquest protects him against Reflect, because the 4th skill isn't a full iframe. He does actually linger and move around in that 4th skill dealing damage, so Reflect characters can really punish him if he is dealing a lot of damage at that time, but the Conquest can cover that. Regardless, both of these CTPs are the solo options, because the top proc can give him super guard break immunity, which is essential if you're going in a 1 vs 1 format so that you're not locked down and end up dying. The hybrid option, and the one that I went with, and is probably the one that I would recommend to most people since he kind of excels more in a 3 vs 3 format than a 1 vs 1 format, is a CTP of Regen with Penetration as the top proc. The reason that this is the hybrid option is specifically because you don't have that super guard break immunity from the top proc, and because the Penetration proc in a 3 vs 3 format can trigger and apply to multiple enemies at the same time. So you're kind of using the CTP of Regen as a way to kind of boost the character by himself to an ability, but also support your other characters at the same time, as opposed to just making him purely have all of the effects from the CTP applied to him or applied to your teammates. The downside is that the character can be locked down with super guard break, especially versus characters that have a lot of super guard break in their kit, like Jean or Sentry for example, but because the character has good survivability and he also has super armor, you can definitely make this CTP work, although obviously not to the same extent as the solo options. If you don't really care about Agent Venom's performance or can't really make him work on your account, then I would probably recommend going with a CTP of Liberation over a CTP of Insight. The CTP of Liberation will give him that guard break immunity, also help out your team, and the character can get some more usability as kind of a hybrid solo character, because he won't be completely locked down without guard break immunity, and because the character has those good PvP effects like iframe ignore, invincible, penetration, and so on. So you definitely can get some little bit more value out of it than if you were to use a CTP of Insight. You can see that Agent Venom definitely isn't a pushover in PvP. He was able to take out my top build team of Sentry, Jean, and Thanos. I would normally have Surfer, but he was banned. And Agent Venom normally just has issues versus characters like Wolverine that can survive very long and have good burst damage and lockdown with that super guard break on the 5th skill and the iframe ignore, and characters like Sentry can also pose problems with that super guard break lockdown. If at some point you have to use Agent Venom in PvP on manual, then the way that you want to play him is to generally just use the 4th skill to open with, get that invincible and penetration, and then stay into your 5th skill till you can go into the 4th skill again. This will allow you to kind of hide in partial iframes, get the damage AoE from the 5th skill and the damage accumulation, and then go back and deal damage in the 4th skill while avoiding damage and kind of moving around. This should also help fill up your tier 4 skill, which will allow you to gain some more burst damage and survivability, and hopefully let you live long enough so that you have access to the awakening skill, which will potentially help you burst down some of those trickier characters like Sentry. It's also worth noting that if you are fighting Sentry with Agent Venom, you want to open with the 4th skill immediately to get that invincible, and then go into the 5th skill so that you can start accumulating damage, similar how you would with the other characters. But you don't want to spam the 4th skill immediately again when Sentry goes into his iframe skill, because it doesn't really connect for some reason when you use an iframe ignore skill and the opponent immediately has gone into their own iframe. I don't know if it's something to do with penetration and iframe together or something different, but you want to wait about a half second to a second to go into your iframe skill so that, or your iframe ignore skill, so that you can actually deal damage to Sentry while he's in that end of his iframe. I'm not really going to be covering Sleeper, but I did include a bonus clip here at the end to showcase how he does with an invincible obelisk. He does have high priority iframe skills and invisibility that also give him iframes, which allow him to survive versus many characters. As you can see here, he is surviving for a pretty good amount of time versus Sentry. So if you do want to build him kind of as an annoying mid-level character, you can give him something like a Steel Authority, and he can probably perform pretty well versus kind of non-metas, because metas will eventually just burst him down because he doesn't have penetration and iframe ignore. But if you don't want to do that, you can obviously just go the route of giving him a CTP of Insight or a CTP of Liberation, just including it here so you get an idea of how he performs as a kind of solo character, if that's an option you want to consider. I definitely don't recommend running this team in Alliance Conquest. I did test it out, but you're better off using Agent Venom versus characters like Carnage, Silver Surfer, or in the future possibly Null. I only did this test to kind of showcase the hybrid potential of Agent Venom and the solo potential for Spider-Man, and I guess to a lesser extent to showcase the survivability of Sleeper. As you saw from the clip, Agent Venom was able to survive both of Doctor Doom's lives and was able to support Spider-Man to keep him alive with the support passive, as well as that penetration proc versus Hulk, who had a type advantage versus him. And not only that, but even Sleeper ended up surviving both of the top and bottom teams of that fight. If you obviously don't pair Agent Venom with Silver Surfer, this is a more realistic team that you could use, pairing him with Carnage and using Spider-Man in there as well. Agent Venom did end up dying because he has a type disadvantage versus Adam Warlock, but he was also able to help in the fight versus Deadpool. Ultimately, Spider-Man did end up surviving the longest, and because he did have a type advantage, was able to take out Adam Warlock and survive versus him for that period of time because of Agent Venom's support passive. So that pretty much covers the character's performance in both PvE and PvP, and kind of goes over what builds you may want to use for the character and whether you want to consider tier 4ing him. You really only want to do that if you're going to build the character as a solo character or as a hybrid. If you're just going to use him as a support, there really isn't much point of doing that, because you're not really going to get much value out of the tier 4 anyway. Similarly, if you're only going to be using the character as a support, then you're not really going to get much value out of this uniform, because the stat increases for the support part isn't really that drastic, so there isn't really a point for you to get the uniform. Even still, I would probably only recommend this uniform and the tier 4 for people who are really invested in things like Otherworld Battle and more so Alliance Conquest. For everyone else, I don't really think it's worth getting him now, especially considering that Null is around the corner and will probably have drastically more value for anyone's account and overall in the game. In the next video, I'll be taking a look at Spider-Man's newest uniform compared to his previous uniform, and to see how much of an impact and difference it made in PvP, and whether the old uniform is potentially still better in certain situations, and whether the new uniform is actually worth getting. So if you're interested in that, make sure to check that out. After that, it'll probably be the 100k Crystal CTP stream on the weekend, probably on Sunday, so if you're interested in that, then make sure to check that out as well. Following that, it'll probably be the Null video, because he should be dropping next week, and that should be a pretty big one, so make sure you don't miss that one. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, found it entertaining or useful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and potentially share it with others. As always, it can help them out, and it definitely helps me out. As always, I appreciate people taking the time to watch my videos, so thank you, but the video is now over.